Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan. Welcome back to the Captain Logan Show. Today, we're going to do another theme show. We're going to be talking primarily about creative writing, and I will take questions throughout the show on all kinds of other topics. So feel free to ask also regular open forum-y, pop culture-y type things. But primarily, I wanted to talk about fiction writing today and just creative writing in general. It's a topic that I get a lot of requests to do more regularly. Years ago, Vince and I did, by the way, hi, everybody. Thanks for being here if you're here live, and thanks for watching after the fact if you're doing that as well. Let me get the comments up here so that I can kind of see things as we're going. Also, as always, thanks to Danny Nixon for helping me out with the show. He is in the comments right now, feverishly sending me things to answer for review and or to reviewing things for me to answer. And it's really, really nice of him, as always, to help me out with that and moderating the chat. But anyway, so years ago, Vince and I did a podcast series, a 5-part series on the important elements, kind of creative writing 101. And a lot of folks have gone back and listened to that over the years and have asked me to, and people seem to get a lot out of that. And it was right off the heels of college for me. So I had all that stuff very fresh in my mind, and we outlined those as we did them. So like before we shot an episode, we did 5 of those, one each week. And before we shot an episode, I would sit down at Vince's desk for about 10 or 15 minutes and just outline them. And then we sat down and recorded those. That's all the prep I had. I think these days it would probably take me longer to put something like that together, but it was all so fresh in my mind because I had just graduated with my English and creative writing degree. And I really miss talking about that stuff. And I talk fiction writing and kind of modern conventions and things all the time through review, and it's still very much where my mind is and what my focus is. Superhero Rewind remains much more about storytelling and character development progression than it is about anything else. The point of those movies is to tell a story in the first place. So that's where my focus is. And I would love to spend more time talking specifically about craft and, the technical side of writing and what's effective, what's not. And 90% of the time that is a depends question, but it's very interesting to look at a specific piece and, talk about what's working and what isn't and why that seems to be the case. There's not always, a nice, easy formula to put that in. I just got a super chat from Mr. Roboto, $2 super chat. Thank you for that. He asked what I learned writing my first book. I will answer that here in a few minutes. I will make that, or here in a couple minutes, I'll make that my first question. If you would, if you are so inclined, of course, as Mr. Roboto just showed us, the super chat is open and you can make sure that your question is answered with a donation there. Really appreciate it. We've been getting a lot of those lately. It's been helping out the channel immensely. So you guys are wonderful for doing that. And thanks a whole bunch. Let me also put in a quick plug, as always, for Patreon, $2 a month on patreon.com/Geekvolution. Get you access to a Geekvolution After Dark. That is my and Eric's uncensored 1-hour talk show where we talk about all kinds of stuff you don't usually hear us talk about on the channel. You also get early episodes of Superhero Rewind, monthly chats with me. I haven't done the one for this month yet, but I'll be doing that soon. And a whole bunch more. Also early episodes of Morphin Mania. Eric and I have started recording those. We're doing every episode of Power Rangers up through RPM because we're crazy people, but we're having a lot of fun with it. It's a really fun show. Just kick back and relax and talk through. And that's going to start in January, but you can already watch the first few episodes on Patreon. Speaking of Patreon, I also wanted to mention, I don't have a specific date for this yet. I just kind of wanted to throw the idea out and find out how many people were interested. I've been talking about this for years. It's something I really want to finally sit down and do if I can find the time. Like I said, I have, as you've noticed, I've streamlined the channel really hard, prioritizing Superhero Rewind, and I want to spend more of my time dealing with fiction and creative writing. And to that end, I really, really want to do my own workshop. And I really miss fiction workshopping. I miss having an excuse to write my own fiction more regularly. I did a novel last year that's going to come out toward the end of this year, and I'm probably going to take out some time a little bit later in this year to sit down and write another novel. But I'm always sharper about this stuff when I'm constantly reading and critiquing other people's fiction, and not just commercial films, but actually printed prose. And I would very much like to know who and how many people would be interested in a thing like that. I'm thinking about making that a new perk for Patreon. It would be probably at the $10 tier. It would be a monthly thing. I would meet folks and who have writing for me, and we would critique people's work. So the group, it would be a workshop, and the group would read your work before you come in. It would be limited to a certain number of pages. You could give us a chapter of a novel, or you could give us a short story if it's short enough, whatever it happened to be. And I think I would be focused on, I've given this a lot of thought, I would focus on prose, and then maybe at some point we would start adding script writing, movie scripts and comic scripts and things like that. But at the beginning, I would want to really focus on fiction again. And it would be a thing where I would read your work, and I would mark up your papers for you, and I would, or your fiction, excuse me, and I would give you a written critique, and then I would head up a workshop where everybody in the group could talk to you about your work and give you constructive criticism. And so if there's a lot of interest in that, I definitely want to start doing that here in probably 3 months. So folks, let me know. I'm going to start. I'll post about that again and get kind of a head count. But if there's enough interest, I want to do that. I would need probably at least 5 writers, and I don't know if I would just take whoever was interested and could come in, or if I would. I am inclined to want to see your writing before I put you in that group, because I would want it to be a somewhat intermediary thing. I don't know if it would be really beneficial to a lot of people to do a straight up beginner one, unless it was all beginners, and I don't know, and I wouldn't have the time to do 2. So it might be a thing where you'd have to kind of try out for it. But anyway, so I'd love to know who's interested, and I'm just putting my feelers out about that. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into the show today. Like I said, I'm going to talk mostly about creative writing today, and if there's other stuff that's on your mind, feel free to ask those things too. I already have quite a few questions from Danny in the comments, so let's get right to it, shall we? The first question, like I said, comes from Mr. Roboto. That's a super chat. What did you learn writing my first book? Well, lots of stuff, obviously. I wrote that book starting in college. I started it as a project for an intermediary creative writing group that met on Wednesday nights with my mentor Greg Luthi back when I was at Johnson County Community College, and then I had other mentors when I was at KU. But I had a lot of my kind of formative experience was with Dr. Luthi, and he and I still keep in touch to this day, and he's read part of the new novel, and he gives me advice a lot, and he's wonderful. A couple of years ago, he had me come in to one of his groups and give a lecture. I was actually looking for those lecture notes earlier. I was going to read you guys some of that, or just pull some of it if it came up, and I can't find it right now. So at some point, I've always meant to sit down and make a video before that. I just haven't got around to it, and now I've lost my notes. I got to find that. I should not have handwritten that whole thing, and I did that. So that was right after Spawn Year. I was still handwriting a lot of things. But anyway, so I don't know. I guess the first big thing is let the thing morph and grow and become what it's going to become, even if it's not anything like what you thought it was going to be in the first place. So that book, The Girl with 7 First Names, is about an interdimensional psychiatry firm. It's a really quirky, kind of silly novel, and it's about a it's about a therapist named Franklin Bryce who helps out a woman named Helena who has 7 multiple personalities, and she thinks amnesia. And it turns out that there's a not so psychological reason for some of that, and he's putting everything completely in psychological terms. And originally, that was an idea that came from high school. And I wrote a dead serious short story that was no good at all, that was about a woman named Helena with 7 multiple personalities, and she was the therapist of the piece. And I thought it would be really interesting to see a person that has that kind of mental issue actually being a psychiatrist and keeping it a secret. And it's a cool idea. I guess I wasn't experienced enough, both as a writer and in life, to really make that work. And when I got to college, it was an idea that I pitched to a guy that I was going to creative writing class with, Dr. Luthai's fiction writing class, and he suggested that the idea was too hokey to do as anything but a comedy. And I don't know if he was totally right about it. I think I probably still could have done that as a more serious piece. And of course, it's a thing that gets serious, but it is an absurdist thing on the face of it, especially once I brought the interdimensional idea in. Where it kind of became like a cross between, Angel and Harry Potter and some other stuff. And so, Harry Potter's a thing that gets really super serious, and it's about all kinds of interesting things, but on the surface, it's also a really quirky kind of comedic idea and world. And so that's kind of the direction I ended up taking that. And it's not what I originally wanted it to be at all. And I fell in love with it as I allowed it to kind of become what at the time it made the most sense for it to end up being. I also learned that there are a billion different ways to plan and structure a book. So originally I thought of the 7 as it was called, the working title for the longest time, became The Girl with 7 First Names. It actually, I self-published it under a different name. Normal is a 4-letter word, which confused people, and nobody understood what it meant. And a lot of people were worried that their kids couldn't read it because it said 4-letter words, so they thought there was a lot of swearing in it, like it was a totally different thing. And it was that was really problematic. So we changed the title later when I went with a traditional publisher, and the girl who drew the cover for us actually came up with a title, and I am forever grateful to her, because I could not come up with a good. I think I'm better at titles now, but back then I was pretty bad at it. And she came up with finally a descriptive title that was catchy and memorable, but also was about what the book was, which is actually kind of interesting because Helena technically has 8 first names, but she's the girl with 7 first names. And not to ruin the ending, but once you get to the end, it becomes almost weirdly not a double entendre title, but a title that doesn't make sense until you get to the end. I don't think she did that on purpose, but it totally worked, and that was part of why I went with it. I digress. I originally thought of it as a series of short stories, and I kind of plotted it as I wrote down a lot of really vague, and I'm not an outliner, but I outlined this a little bit, just real broad strokes. I wrote out kind of an episode guide, kind of a series Bible. So here's who the main characters are and what they're about, and you got to stick to that. And then here are some episode ideas. And I was really into Buffy and Angel at the time, and I was in really a TV mode. And it ended up turning into a novel. Originally, it was just short stories, and I had this kind of overarching season arc planned, and for what was going to be short stories that I was just going to publish on a website and let people read, and then it turned into a novel. And eventually, I took those 12 much longer stories and broke them up into different chapters, and it ended up totally working. You've got a lot of side stories in that book, and now that I've said that, if you read it, you'll be able to see, oh yeah, this does look like it was planned more like a season of television before a book, but it ended up weirdly kind of working. And so, like I said, you kind of got to let things just go where they're going to go and not hold yourself rigidly to your initial ideas. But like, I've never written anything like that since. Spawnyear is a totally different animal, and my new book, my food novel, is a totally different animal. And so that's a couple major things that I learned with that. And also, it's if you self-publish, make sure that you have an editor and you don't just have people read your book and mark it up for you. Because like no matter how many people you have do that, if you don't have a professional in your corner, you're probably going to have a lot more mistakes. And even with the professional editor that I had, right, we still had mistakes that we missed, but far fewer than the initial self-published version. So yeah, anyway, so that's some stuff. Really hard not to be long-winded when I'm talking about writing. Blue Dragon 5, Cap, using Spawn Year and Batman Year as an example, could you speak about evolving your story in a serialized long-form narrative? Yeah, absolutely. So Spawn Year was weird because it's and it's funny. I'm sitting here like resisting talking too much about my own stuff, but that's kind of what's coming up so far. But Spawn Year was originally, as a lot of folks probably know, a kind of cookie cutter story, or more of really a framework device for reviews, and it was kind of more of a sketch thing, more of a joke before it was actually a story. And me being who I am, I could not help but turn it into an actual kind of traditional story with a character that wants something, is trying to get it, grows and changes, learns something about himself, has opportunities for change, etc. And a lot of that, as I've talked about, happened because Jeremy Pierce came in and made me a costume, and I had to figure out a way to work that in, and it changed the whole course of the show. Where originally Captain Logan was just going to wake up at the end, and the whole thing was going to kind of watch just like a sketch with a bunch of reviews in the middle, where Captain Logan wakes up at the end and realizes that everything he just read was in a dream, and so he's not sure. So like it can't possibly be what Spawn actually was. And then Vince tells him, "Oh, you're going to have to read it again." And he freaks out because he doesn't want to have to go through all that again. And what it really is, is it worse or better? And I'm really glad we didn't do that. Partly because the story we told I'm really proud of, and also partly because it doesn't really actually make any sense. Like, why would I have all that in my head? How would I know what the actual, because that is what the real books are, is like we made things up. So like, how would that even work? But that's what I thought of in the first place. So yeah, so I really like letting stories evolve and kind of going from the hip and letting it just turn into what it's going to turn into without meticulously plotting. Like, I feel like you lose, or at least I do. And part of this is because I'm not a real technically minded person. So some of this is a right brain, left brain thing, right? But for me, if I hold myself to a really rigid structure, like I was talking about earlier, I will end up missing massive opportunities. And sometimes things that start off as a mistake can turn into the best ideas that you end up bringing in, as long as you're really smart about it and you keep really good track of your continuity. You can make a continuity mistake, and or a thing that starts out to look like a continuity mistake, and by fixing it, end up having a way more creative, way more imaginative story. So in my first book, again, there's a character that I was. Well, a couple examples. This isn't actually the continuity issue thing, but there was an idea I had that I pitched Sarah, because she helped me brainstorm a lot of that book. And I said, what if we had a guy who turns out to actually be a dimension? She's like, well, that's stupid. And I'm like, why? And she said, well, because your multiverse is a network. How could you have a person that's inside of it, but is also connected to it? That really doesn't make a lot of sense. And then also, not to spoil too much about my book, but there's also kind of a personification thing with the whole multiverse in the first place, where it is actually kind of a thinking, feeling being. And so how would it make any sense to have that? So then I turned that idea into a guy who was trying to con people into thinking that he was actually Dimension, and it turned out that he had a personal, portable, dimensional aperture with him, and he made you think that he was a Dimension and could suck you into himself. And he used that as part of an elaborate con man scheme, and it ended up being one of my favorite chapters of the book, all because Sarah told me that my idea was stupid. So I didn't abandon it. I altered it and turned it into something that ended up being quite a bit more interesting. And then there was also this bit in that book where like an idiot, I didn't realize until the last minute that my main character had two first names. There's this whole thing in the book where people in the multiverse, people who know about alternate dimensions, are superstitious about people with more than one first name. So if you have a last name that sounds like a first name, horrible things happen to you. And that was the Helena Catherine thing, or Catherine is a first name. And so she must have 7 multiple personalities and amnesia, and all these horrible things keep happening around her because she has 2 first names. And then I didn't realize until I was hip deep into writing a chapter at the time, a short story that was all about that, Franklin Bryce is also a first name. What am I thinking? I thought of Bryce in the first place because of Lex Luthor's wife in the 2nd season of Smallville. That's Helen Bryce. And because I had a Helena in my book, I thought of Bryce, and I made that Franklin's last name. Franklin, I think, just came from a guy that I used to work with at a restaurant. And anyway, so it ended up being a big character thing that he didn't think of it either. And that kind of speaks to how still unused to being part of this multiverse and knowing about these alternate dimensions and stuff he is. He's still a rookie at it, and I was able to use that to my advantage. Anyway, there are lots of examples of that in Spawn Year also, and the thing that I wasn't afforded with Spawn Year, of course, and I would never suggest this to anybody, is I wasn't able to revise anything really. So like with I could write an episode and revise that, but everything that was already published on the channel, I'm stuck with. And so if I did end up having any massive continuity errors or anything, I had to figure out some way to fix them in the process of it with what was there already, and hope that I didn't have to retcon anything. Luckily, there was never anything major like that. We were really careful and it ended up really working out. But I don't recommend that to anybody, publishing everything. And like now I understand how people who make TV shows must feel, TV showrunners. And that was the most difficult and kind of headachy thing about Spawn Year was you'll have something posted, and then you'll think of maybe a better idea or something that doesn't seem to be working, and you'll have to keep kind of screwing with it and fixing things that you were going to do later that aren't out yet, so you're not stuck with those. But oh no, I forgot about this thing that I had already, so I can't use that a thing I was going to do moving forward. But I love the serialized long form narrative. It is so much fun because it's so sprawling, and you'll have things that you never would have thought of until you like I said, either make a mistake or you just you just have all these different moving parts. I don't know. It's really fun writing long like that. And I always recommend that people have an idea of where they're going and then let that change with anything that you write. But especially with the kind of long form thing, whatever your ending is in your head, you write to that. That's probably not ultimately what it's going to be. And I like becoming more ambitious, where you start with a smaller, simpler idea, and then naturally you discover these really cool ideas instead of shooting for the moon in the first place, and then discovering that it's too big. You're too big for you're acting too big for your britches. You can't quite handle all of it. It's neat when something that starts from a smaller place kind of explodes. And I mean, that can be problematic. You don't want something, you don't want to be inconsistent and start with something that made sense to be small in the first place and then let it get away from itself. I felt like the Joker blogs kind of had that problem, where once they got into another season and they decided to not just do the shorts where it's the Joker talking to a camera, to a surveillance camera, and they started making it more of like a TV show and shooting more cinematic. I felt like it was bigger than they could handle. But when I say bigger, I mean like idea-wise. I mean, like where you let your characters drive the whole thing, and then suddenly they will surprise you and take you to places that you never expected that you would go. Lone Wolf Jedi of Gotham. Cap, do you find it easier to write dialogue rather than story or plot? I tend to generally find it somewhat easy to write dialogue, but sometimes lose my footing with actual plot and story. Yeah, that kind of depends, right? Like in a short story, not, or at least the short stories I've written, not so much, because I write a lot of really character-driven, or excuse me, dialogue-driven things in the first place. So the plotting will happen through character interaction with me. Like I said, I fly by the seat of my pants. I make up everything as I go along, and then try to tighten it and tweak it in post. So much of the process is revision, much of the time, and so I will sometimes, and sometimes too much, like I'll rack my brain really hard about what I want to see happen in a story, or about what the, like if I'm doing something science fiction, like what the pseudoscience is, or you know, how certain elements of the internal logic for something more heightened actually work, you know. So I mean, I guess coming up with the rules of the world in the first place are sometimes more difficult for me than anything, but not necessarily plot. It just depends. I mean, Spawn Year, yeah, I had to rack my brain pretty hard about how certain elements of that were going to work, and it took me a while to come up with you get to the end, and it turns out that it was all, you know, like truncated in an hour with a virtual reality machine that Captain Logan has in his head, or you know, has that's putting him in this dream anyway. But I don't think about plot real hard. That's the thing. Is I kind of, I mean, sometimes I think about it too much. But when I'm sitting down and actually writing, that's for one of the further things from my mind. It tends to come pretty naturally for me, at least after I've done some initial legwork just in my brain. I don't write a lot down before I start actually writing a piece. I tend to, I've talked about this a lot, I tend to daydream a lot, and that's where a lot of my kind of world build plot ideas come from. And the work I'm doing more when I sit down and write is building character and letting them, like I said, drive the story. And so if it's really working, that dialogue will also drive the story. And I don't mean exposition in dialogue, right? I mean that the action can also be dialogue in the things that the characters are doing, the decisions they're making, or sometimes through the dialogue of the piece. And sometimes you'll have, you know, maybe just philosophical moments where characters are just hashing out things and trying to figure out what they feel about something. But very often it's also this character is coming up with now a decision they're making in the moment that they're expressing to another character, and that moves you to another place. So when it's really working for me, I'm writing dialogue that is progressing the story, and so the plot and character are happening in tandem. Cinematographic. Hey, Captain Logan, when is it effective or not effective to use a Kansas City shuffle? Reveals foreshadowed by virtue of seemingly random details as a story device, and what are the pros and cons? So I feel like I talked about this a couple shows ago. That somebody already asked me this one, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but yeah, like. That's a kind of thing that I think works best when you put it in post, right? Like in the moment, it's difficult to foreshadow things, at least unless you're meticulously outlining something. And again, I'm not telling people absolutely not to do that. Different people work differently. Like meticulously outlining works really well for some writers. It's just not how I do things. Again, right brain, left brain. But that's a thing that I think it's easier to kind of cleverly insert on a second pass at something. And if it's and so, you know, the details aren't random to you, right? And so when you go in and you're making sure that your details are revealing things, but I won't necessarily know as the reader what is being revealed until I've been through it already, and then maybe me on a second read even, I'm like, oh, that's what you were that's what you were trying to sorry, I'm just looking at some new questions. That's what you were, trying to foreshadow. Yeah, I mean, I guess this is probably what I said before. I guess the problem sometimes with doing that is the details can seem too random and they can seem inserted, and you just don't want it to look forced. And like I say, you can make anything work. You just have to make it work. So if those details are put in as kind of breadcrumbs, and I never even notice that they're foreshadowing things, that's when it's really working. When it's pretty clear that it's just a random thing that's happening, so that I'll recognize it later, and then it's like a forced setup and payoff, that's when it doesn't work. Dave Atkins, switching gears for a minute, E3 is coming real soon. Any particular games you're looking forward to? To be honest with you, I can't really think of a lot right now. I haven't been keeping up with new video games real hard, and I'm waiting for, I'm excited to see what's announced there, but I haven't been keeping up, so I don't know what things we're anticipating to be announced in the first place. I haven't talked to Dan in a while about new video games, and he usually keeps me abreast on these things, but he's been, busy with school and stuff. And so, yeah, honestly, at the moment, I can't think of one. I don't know what Nintendo's got coming for the Switch. Lately, a lot of the stuff they've been releasing have been things that were on the Wii U that nobody played because nobody had a Wii U, and I do. And so there's a lot of things they've been putting out where I'm like, it would be nice, I guess, to be able to play Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze on the go, and there's like another mode and stuff, but I have that game already. So yeah, I'm mostly interested to see what ends up coming out for the Switch, which is the system I'm buying for most right now. But I have not had a lot of time to play video games lately, and besides the occasional, old school thing that I can spend 15-20 minutes with. So if there's anything that sounds amazing that I would love, let me know, because I honestly have not been keeping up. Jeffrey Patron, do you as a writer avoid certain subjects in your work? This is a great question, because you feel you don't have the grounds to give the subject its due. Mental health issues seem to be a difficult subject for me personally. Yes, absolutely. And also, so I guess this makes me think of a couple things. So there's not writing about certain subjects because you feel like you don't have enough knowledge of it or enough experience with it, or that you might accidentally come off as disingenuous, right? There are certain kinds of characters, for instance, that I wouldn't immediately go to because I don't want to accidentally come off. I don't want that character to accidentally come off as like a cliche or a stereotype, and I might do that on accident while trying to avoid it really hard, right? There are certain kinds of characters that I've never written because of that. I've never written a mentally handicapped character, for instance, because I would be maybe a little bit worried about that, and I feel like it would take immense research to be absolutely sure that what I was doing came off as genuine and as realistic as I can within the logic of the piece. Obviously, as I always say, being believable is more important than being realistic. But if you're writing about something like that is, as you say, Jeffrey, mental health issues, where you're coming from a place of where you're wanting to make it feel authentic, you have to think about that somewhat realistically. It would be weird to have a really heightened world where where mental health issues have their own rules, right? Because then you might come off like you're making fun of it or something. So that would be, even if you do that kind of thing inside of a more quirky universe, that part of it, I feel like you'd have to do pretty. You have to try to be pretty authentic about. So yes, I have that most certainly, and I also have it with a lot of jobs too. Like I avoid writing police officers because it's usually because it's really easy to accidentally fall into the stereotypes and the tropes again, and so you would want to spend some time researching those things before you actually did them, and so. I would suggest with beginning writers, write what you know, maybe just because you want to get a lot of experience actually doing it, right? Like actually writing a lot. And so I always suggest that people write constantly when they get started, and it doesn't matter if it's good, write stream of consciousness, write little what am I trying to think of? Like writing, write from writing prompts, do all that kind of stuff, and do try to write a simple story, and just understand that you're probably, except for prodigies, you're going to write a lot of bad stuff. You're going to write a lot of crap before you write anything good. And so you don't want to bog yourself down with a whole bunch of research with a really elaborate, complicated, ambitious kind of story before you've actually had a lot of experience just doing the work, just putting sentences together to create paragraphs, to create stories. And so before you have done a lot of it, you should probably a lot of what you know, and always draw from personal experience, but you don't have to only draw from personal experience. But yeah, so even as much as I've done, and obviously I have plenty of improving to do as a writer, I'm not real comfortable sitting down and writing certain kinds of characters and about certain types of topics. Mental health is one. Politics used to be one. And then I just wrote a book that went to a weirdly political place. And I didn't even mean for that to happen. It just naturally got there. That ended up being the kind of piece that it was, which is really strange and not like me at all. And you'll unlock things from yourself. It's like playing a video game where you're like, I didn't know I had that in there. You level up. And that was a really cool experience. But yeah, that's a thing. Like, I don't know, real crime, anything to do with drugs and alcohol, anything to do with anything, super technical, I kind of stay away from, because I don't have that brain, and I don't know math, and it's weird because I'm such a sci-fi guy, but I don't know jack for anything about science. So yeah, there are lots of things that I avoid. And then finally, like I said, last year with the food novel, I did a lot of research for a thing I didn't know anything about, and was really happy with how it turned out. And hopefully other folks are too. But I guess I'll find out when I get that published, or when I publish that later this year. But great question. Noah O, do you have any novels planned after the one you're currently working on? Not yet. And okay, so the one I'm working on right now is the one I wrote last year, my food novel. The working title is The Edible States of America. I'm kicking around other titles. That one I keep going back to, but I'm revising that right now. I say I'm doing it right now. It's kind of on the back burner. I'm working on channel stuff so much, but I need to be working on that. I have another novel idea that I want to do right after that, that I'm really stoked about, that will also require immense amounts of research, and really looking forward to that. I want to do that. But yeah, so my plan right now is to take a couple months off every year and write a book every year. And I wrote my last novel in 8 weeks, and hopefully the next one goes that well, and I'm able to do that. But what I did with that was 6 days a week. 6 or 7. Did I write every single day? I think I took a day off. I can't even remember now. I wrote in the evening. I wrote 2 hours every night, or a couple thousand words, whichever I hit first. And usually, if I hit that, I would go ahead and keep writing. And I wrote, like I said, for 8 weeks, and I was able to get it knocked out. It was really exciting. The fastest I've ever done anything. John Early, Captain Logan, have you ever thought about writing a movie script? Yeah, when I was in college, I wrote a couple of short film scripts that I never produced. I just wrote them for a class. Had a pretty cool screenwriting class. It was not as challenging as I wished it was. I only had to write 2 scripts in that class. I found it, after a lot of experience writing short stories, actually really easy for me. I mean, like, there were challenges about it, but it was a thing that I thought would have been really hard if I hadn't done a lot of other kinds of writing. And you want a lot of blank space on in a movie script, and it's I think kind of easier to do that when you've written every aspect of a thing where the reader has to use his imagination to fill in the blanks. When you're only writing dialogue and minimal description, I think it's a lot easier to communicate well when you've had to do every piece of it. Now that you're like taking parts of it off, it felt weirdly like evolving to another form, if that makes any sense at all. And I loved it. I would really like to do more of that. I've also written screenplays. I've also written plays, stage plays, and I did that actually first before I did screenplays. But yeah, I would love to do more of that. But I've never written a feature length movie script, mostly because obviously I wrote a ton of stuff in a movie script format using Celtex for Spawn Year, but I haven't actually written a feature film, and it would be a fun thing to do. I wouldn't expect that it would ever get made unless I wrote something small, like a small budget thing that I could do myself. So I might do that at some point. I have considered doing some kind of movie project at some point for the channel, especially because these long form things are becoming harder and harder for me to find time to do. Batman Year has been impossible to find time to make, and it's getting away from me. And I'm honestly not totally sure I'm going to be able to finish that project at this point. I had announced that I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to finish it, and then I announced that I had figured it out, and I thought I had figured it out, and I just have not been able to find the time to work on it at all. So yeah, it's not officially dead, but I don't know what's happening with that yet. Hard to prioritize because there's not as much interest in it as there is some other things we're doing, and but I want to be writing fiction, of some kind. But thanks for that question. Jason, my son, is watching upstairs. Hi, Jason. Have you ever written a comic? I've never written a comic that was actually produced. I have at times had various artists that were going to draw for me, and that fell through for whatever reason. I wrote a script that I was really happy with for a comic that would be set in my novel universe, in the Seven universe, and I was going to do an anthology series that would be a one and done issue every time we produced one, where a minor character from the last story would become the main character in the next story, and they would kind of hand each other off every time like that. And it never got off the ground, but if you've read my novel, that story was a story about my favorite character in my book, Rajal Sharak, the guy the con artist who sells people superpowers on interdimensional eBay. It was going to be a short story all about that guy. And then he would pass it off to somebody else. But I also wrote a short comic script for The Real Manos for Justin Cristelli for an anthology book that he was doing for Red Knight. And that is supposed to be done at some point. He's switched publishers and is republishing all of Red Knight, I think, in color now. And eventually, hopefully he's able to still get to that, because that was a lot of fun to write also. And I won't say who right now. I don't know if he wants me to talk about it, but he gave me he gave me carte blanche to pick a character in his universe that I wanted to write about, and I got to write about a villain, and it was really fun. I got to write the canonical backstory for a villain, which was great. What else? Carl Maxey, Captain Logan, how do you find the right publisher for a book? Yeah, of course, this is the $6 billion question. It's really super tough. So I'll start with mainstream publishing, and I don't want to bore anybody with this, but basically, what you have to do is, and I'm sure there are places, there are a lot of places online to find these things now. I always had to buy those big hefty books that would the kind of publishers, writer guide books. I forget what they're even called now. That would give you a list of every publisher that published fiction and nonfiction and everything, and it would give you a blurb about them and the kinds of things that they published. And what you want to do is get kind of write something I never suggest looking at what a publisher publishes and trying to make something that fits for them. That is backwards. That is the wrong order of doing things. Write something that, because usually your piece will not turn out well if you do that, usually. Write something that you love and hope that there are other people like you that will like it as well. There is no magic bullet. There's nothing you can write where you can be certain that this thing is going to catch on. And I wrote a really commercial thing that's accessible for everybody, and any publisher would want to publish it. If you have that kind of thinking, get that out of your head right now, because publishers are very, very, very specific about what they publish. Most publishers, especially smaller publishers, put out a very particular kind of thing. They'll publish just like erotic fantasy, or they'll publish just crime stories, and sometimes a very particular kind of crime stories, and sometimes mostly. A lot of it's about whatever the clientele they've built is, right? So, you might find a publisher that publishes things that are only about female protagonists, and also they have to be science fiction, and also they have to include a dog, and like they can get really, really specific. That's a goofy example, but they're usually really super specific. So what you want to do is find a handful of publishers that look like they're in the ballpark, that they publish the kind of thing that you're talking about, that you wrote, be it short fiction, be it a novel. Read very closely about the publisher, and make sure that they actually publish books. If you wrote a book, make sure they actually publish short fiction. If you wrote short fiction, make sure that you know that you're looking at a magazine versus a book publisher, whatever it is, and then find out what their criteria is and for submissions, and make sure that you follow that absolutely to the letter. So some publishers, and I haven't sent things out for years because I like working for myself, and I'm going to start a Geekvolution publishing arm, and I'm going to publish my own work, and I'm going to start hopefully publishing some other people's work as well eventually, which is part of why I want to start the Geekvolution Creative Writing Workshop. And I should have mentioned that earlier, but if we do the workshop and you're in the workshop, if you write something that I love, there is every potential that I will publish it. So that would be also another incentive to be in the workshop. But anyway, so Solar Dragon 007, Cap, have you ever considered writing erotic fantasy? No, not really. I really haven't. I think I would be horrible at that. I want to write a good love story. I really do. Not erotic, but I would like to write a really good love story. And I don't know if I would be any good at that. I've never really tried it. I guess I did a novella once that was kind of a love story, and I guess it was okay, but that wasn't well, I guess that I was gonna say it's not primarily what it was. It morphs into something else. Whatever. Anyway, but I never really a really good one. But that's as far as I go with that. But anyway, so it's really important that you see, like, if you need to send how many pages they want, what the form letter is supposed to look like. A lot of these places are really meticulous about it, and it seems like a lot of places just want to make sure that you're able to follow directions. That's part of it, and so make sure that you do everything they ask you to in sending them something. Make sure that the page numbers are there and in the right place, in the right margins that they ask for. Some places like things in the top, some places like things in the bottom. It's obnoxious. There's not an industry standard. There's a lot of different ways that different companies like those things, and of course, this is a cliche at this point. You'll hear every writer and publisher or agent say this. Don't be freaked out by rejection letters. You're going to get them. You're going to get a lot of them. And the publishing, I don't want to discourage anybody from trying to get published, but these days, the publishing industry is not in great shape, and a lot of companies are, not wanting to take a chance on things and not pulling the trigger on things that might sell really well for them. But they play things safe, and they keep publishing the kinds of things they've always published, or they don't want to go to. They don't want to try to be trendsetters because there's just not enough people reading, and there's such a And there's so many things vying for people's attention, right? For people that for those of us that actually are reading, there's so much out there, and it's so much easier to get your work in front of people than it ever used to be. That it makes it harder to get your work in front of people, just because it's so saturated, and there's so much there. So the lines are very blurred between traditional publishing, professional, and self-publishing, right? You can self-publish a thing these days and get noticed sometimes as well or better than you would with a traditional publisher, especially with a smaller publisher. And again, I'm not discouraging people from sending out form letters because there are... You look more professional and people take you seriously if you have been published a couple of times, right? So if you so even if you don't make any money with your book, if you can say I have been published, that adds to your credibility and it looks really good on a resume. But don't expect just because you got published it means you're going to make money, or it means you're going to make a lot of money, because especially if you go with a smaller publisher like I did, because I love my publisher. He's no longer around publishing. He's doing other things now. But he wasn't able, he was a brand new publisher. He didn't have enough money. He was able to print a lot of books for me, but he wasn't able to get me noticed real hard. And I was never in bookstores, locally or otherwise. And I pretty much was able to use that experience to say I've been published, which is nice. It's a good thing to have. But B, to not have to go print on demand, have a lot of books on hand in the first place, have a professional cover artist, have a professional editor, and not have to pay any of those costs myself up front. And what that afforded me was basically just a lot of books on hand that I could sell myself, word of mouth, and on the channel. And that was a really good thing to have. There's a lot of benefits to print on demand also, but there are more upfront costs, especially if you want a good cover and if you want a professional editor, which again, I really recommend you do, even if you self-publish, if you can, save up for it and hire somebody to do that for you. So there are pros and cons to going both ways. I know that wasn't the question, but it was the thing I really wanted to talk about today, if publishing came up. So to answer your question, the way you find the right publisher is you look for somebody that seems to publish the kind of thing that you wrote, and then also send out form letters. And if that doesn't end up working, consider the self-publishing thing, because there are a lot of examples, like I can't remember his name right now, but like the guy who wrote The Martian, of people who just publish on their own. With him, he was just posting regular chapters on a website, and he got noticed and by a publisher, and now he's a major author, and he has a movie. His book was made into a movie. So there are so many different ways of going about it. Write because you love it, and then be smart about the ways in which you try to publish, and try some different things, but make sure that you're doing it because you have a story to tell and you love it, and you want that experience, and not because you think you're going to make a whole lot of money. Wonderful if that happens for you, but you're going to have a much more wonderful experience if you don't expect that. Most certainly. Mr. Roboto, $2 super chat again. Thank you. In-universe stories or prequels, which is for you? In-universe stories or prequels? I guess I don't entirely understand that question. Like you mean... You mean like a sequel to a story that was told already in that universe, or a prequel to it? If that's the question, I guess it just it's easy to say it depends for everything, right? But I guess it kind of depends on what the idea is. If it's a thing where we got to a certain point and there's just nowhere else to go, so now we're just going to go backwards and give a lot of backstories for characters that never had them, that's not usually really interesting to me. I don't usually love going backwards, but sometimes there is just a great story to tell that's inside a pocket of a universe. So I don't love, and this is with movies and books and everything, but I don't tend to care as much about here's where this character started as I do here's a character that we don't know anything about, and we're like, maybe they're a minor character that we saw once, or even a character that we don't know anything about, or that has never appeared. that's in this cool universe that I already love, and then we go back and we tell a story about them because there's just a really cool story to tell about them. That's the kind of prequel thing I like, where it doesn't matter that it's a prequel. Maybe it can be informed by what we know about that world, and that makes it worth having read what was there already. But it's cooler if you can read it in a vacuum. I had that with, I've talked about this before, the K.A. Applegate with Animorphs. She had the Andalite Chronicles. That was a book that was all about Elfangor, who is the mentor guy, not really the mentor because he dies right away, but who gives the Animorphs their powers. And we get a lengthy story all about Andalite culture and where he came from. And I read it before I knew what Animorphs was, and got into Animorphs because of that book. And that was an example of just a really cool science fiction story that I didn't have to know what was there already. I much prefer those. A-Box Stark, do you have any tips regarding pacing? Yeah, that's, I mean, it's such a broad question. With something like pacing, it's easy for me to look at a thing and say, this is paced really well, and this isn't. But I guess broad strokes, I would say, try to have a really good balance if you have a dialogue-driven thing anyway, because obviously you can write great stories that have no dialogue in them or minimal dialogue. But try to have, you know, a nice sense of balance between dialogue and description, and make sure that description doesn't go on too long. Never anything that doesn't reveal something. So some people are in love with the sound of their own voice in one way or another, right? You have authors that love writing dialogue and think that they're wonderful at banter. You to read 50 pages of banter that doesn't actually progress the story at all. You also have writers who love description and they want to tell you every blade of grass and every branch of a tree, and we get 20 pages of that and we're not progressing the story along. So it's really important to practice both and to get as good as you can at both. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. I'm a dialogue guy before I'm a description guy. I'm very minimal about my description, and sometimes I think that helps my pacing, and sometimes I think that rushes my pacing. So you have to be careful about that. I tend to write too little description, and I have to go back and add quite a bit. I also tend to have to take out some dialogue because my characters will be windbags and they will just talk forever. So that's the first thing that comes to my head anyway, as a good tip for pacing. Daniel Davis, Cap, have you ever gotten writer's block? What do you do when that happens? I sometimes find I need to get my ideas and mind sorted when that happens. Yeah, writer's block, of course, is a really weird thing. I go back and forth on what that is and if it even exists. It does, don't get me wrong, but for me personally anyway, I can sit down with no ideas whatsoever and just think of, in the moment, staring at a blank page, like the name of a character and a job he has, and just start flying off the handle and explore this germ that's not even an idea yet. It's just a character, and then a premise will unfold from that. So me personally, and not everybody works like me, I always think better with a keyboard under my hand. I always think better when I'm talking, and I especially think better when I'm typing. If you have that, if you are that kind of a person, I suggest just stream of consciousness for a while. And don't expect that what you're writing will ever be used for anything. Allow yourself, and I say this all the time, sometimes I have to write a couple of pages of introduction for Superhero Rewind before I actually get into the real introduction, just to get myself there. And then once I'm there, I'm comfortable and I roll and I'm good. But the blank page is kind of the scariest thing. And a lot of people think that you have to already have, if not an outline and a lot of ideas already, you have to have a basic germ before you can sit down and start writing. If you have the writer's block problem, I would suggest maybe try writing and with no idea what you're even writing, and see if anything comes from that. That's my advice. That's what I tend to do. I'm sure that doesn't work for everybody. And if your writer's block is more, I just don't feel like writing, I'm just not sure that I'm even in the headspace for it, just live some life, you know, don't think too much about it. Do some reading for inspiration and do some living for inspiration, you know. Go out, if you can, if you have time and money, take a vacation or something. But even beyond that, just go people watch and walk streets and see if anything just happens to hit you. Like if not like a great idea for a story, just you know, putting you in some kind of a mood, I think can help a lot as well. We are already past 4 o'clock. I'm going to answer a couple more real quick. Joey Whalen, Cap, how open are you to taking a look at pieces of writing that your viewers are working on? I've been hired to write a play for local theater and would love some critiques when a draft is done. So I have always had a policy of not really reading people's stuff, just because I get suggestions, or I get that request from folks all the time. And I feel like if I answer one, I have to answer all of them. But I'm thinking about doing this workshop, and if I did that, that would be the place for it. And you could come in to the workshop just for one session, and we could look at that piece, and that could be all you came in for. And then if you wanted to keep coming, you could keep coming, or not. But I'm that if I do the Patreon workshop, that would be the place for that, and I would read anybody's anything if they were there. Like I said, I kind of want to focus on fiction writing, but if there were a lot of people that were working on things for class that they really wanted me to look at, I would make an exception for that, and I would just ask you to be in that workshop for like a month. That's what I would do. Anthony Casero came late. Hopefully you didn't handle this already. Tips for handling characters who are extremely, extremely intelligent. Wow. Yeah, it's really tough, right? Especially if it's a POV character, because you have to, and I made this mistake once with that novella I mentioned earlier that was kind of a love story, where if everyone in the piece is telling your protagonist that they're brilliant and how amazing they are and how good they are at something, especially if that has anything to do with language, you have to make the reader buy it, and you have to be brilliant because you're writing that brilliant character. And that can make you look really full of yourself, and it can be embarrassing. It can just make you look like an idiot. I think it's very difficult. I think the kind of Star Trek way to do it is the technobabble thing. It's to have a character who is really intelligent, but we don't have to get in their heads about it. And so they might have a broad, really cool idea by Noah. They might have a broad, brilliant notion, but we don't have to know the minutia. We don't have to know all the moving parts of it. And I think that's the way that you get away with that, where a character is really super smart, but you don't have to be the smartest person alive to write them. As a point of view character, I think that's much more difficult to do. And as a first person POV character, for me, that sounds impossible. Mario 500 now. Captain, did you ever have a favorite TV program based on Wizard of Oz, Wonderful Wizard of Oz? Yeah, no, not really. I was never a big Oz guy. Yeah, not really. I mean, obviously I saw the original movie and then Return to Oz, or whatever that other movie was. It's been forever since I've seen that. But yeah, I was never a giant Oz fan. My kids love it. I should visit that at some point. But anyway, well, folks, that is going to be it for me today. I didn't answer a ton of questions because I got very thoughtful, kind of complex questions, and I was able to talk about a lot of things today I was hoping to talk about through those. So sorry if I didn't answer as many things as you guys were hoping I would, but that is but that's what happens sometimes when I talk about something a little bit more I don't know, complex and close to my heart like this. I don't know what we're going to do next week. It will probably be another theme show. If anybody has a really cool idea, let me know, and I will noodle every suggestion. I also wanted to take the opportunity to recommend a couple of books if you are a beginning writer, or if you write a lot and you're just looking for reference. The main creative writing textbook that I used in college was a book by Sands Hall called Tools of the Writer's Craft. This is, of course, all about literary fiction before anything, although I think she goes a little bit into bits of genre stuff, but I can't remember if she goes to any genre places. It's been a while since I've looked at this, but she gets into really nitty gritty stuff about making sure that all of your details are relevant and that they inform your character in some way. She has a lot of really good examples of writing that she draws from, and shows you this is a good way to do a thing, this is a bad way to do a thing, and I recommend that a lot. And obviously Stephen King's On Writing, which I've reviewed and talked about a lot, so I won't get back into that, but this is I think probably, for me, the most important writing text right now. This writing science fiction and fantasy book is not bad. There are things in it that I don't agree with. This is by Crawford Killian. What I like about it is that there's a lot of broad general writing advice and kind of writing life advice. We didn't get into a lot of that today. Maybe I'll do another show like this and talk about that at some point. But this is useful even if you're not just writing science fiction and fantasy, kind of just broad strokes, general ideas and suggestions about writing regularly and keeping up your pace and that kind of thing. There are some really good writing exercises, and writing exercises can be really hit or miss. I don't recommend a lot of writing exercise books, but there's the 3 a.m. Epiphany by Brian Kittley that I like a lot. Some really unusual, kind of off the wall kinds of writing suggestions. It just prompts to sit down and kind of get your mind going. One of the essential books, if you need a refresher on grammar, is William Strunk and E.B. White's The Elements of Style. I think every writer should have this. I think it's a really, really important book. And if you run through this and do some of the exercises. I was looking through this because I think there are exercises in this, but I can't remember. But if you look at this every so often, you'll be in really, really good shape for as far as modern conventions of grammar and making sure that you're writing correctly. And then, and you know what? I did a writing show, and I never talked about the kind of big rules for me, which I feel like I should bring up whenever I'm talking about this and doing kind of a broad strokes thing. But on writing, the most important thing is to know the rules before you break them. That's the most important thing, and I think it's really important when you're writing, especially short fiction, starting out, that you write that you just, like I said, know what the rules are and do it by the book, and then start monkeying with it. You want to make sure that you're not self-indulgent and that you're communicating to the reader that you know what you're doing, and that's much. I'm gonna buy it a lot more if I say, okay, he knows what the conventions are, but he has a reason for monkeying with them. That's the first rule. The second rule is nobody cares about your fiction. No one cares. Make them care. And the third thing is you can make anything work. You just have to make it work. I say that all the time. I've talked about that ad nauseum, and that's. And also, I guess the big fourth thing, like I mentioned earlier, this one I did talk about, is you have to write a lot of crap before you write anything good, and let that happen. All right, so that is it today. Thanks a lot, everybody, for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this was useful for folks. And like I said, next week we'll talk about something else, pop culture again. I'm sure something fun. If there is a particular topic that you'd like me to talk about, let me know, and I will consider it. And you guys are wonderful. Thanks everybody for being here. I'll see you again next Wednesday. I am Captain Logan, and enjoy the omnibus. That all just came up about a couple hours ago now. All the videos are available in the playlist, even all the unlisted videos that haven't gone into your YouTube box yet. So check it out and enjoy. I am Captain Logan, and I'll see you again next time.